name's Ted Gardner. We're at the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County on the 3rd of May, 2007. And we're here with Jack Keller, who is just a great friend of mine, and I'm very fortunate to have him as a friend, and his charming wife is here with us too. And Jack is going to tell us about his experiences. We have Dennis Daly as the operator of our camera here. We're very, very thankful to the Public Library, particularly the History Department, which is just a great place, as you can see, Jack. And Dennis is doing a wonderful job here. What I like to do to get started is find out about you. Where were you born, Jack?
I was born in College Hill.
College Hill? Where'd you go to elementary school?
Went to Cedar Avenue. Went through my 8th grade at Cedar Avenue Elementary School.
And then high school?
Well, I hate to talk about high school because I went the first 2 years at Hughes. And sorry to say, I didn't do very good. And I had to go to summer school every year. So on my 3rd year, a friend of mine says, "Why don't you go to Aviation High?" And I talked to my parents, and my parents says, "You know, that may be a good idea. Might be the
solution
thing we needed for Jack." So anyway, I was down here to 9th and Broadway. That's where Aviation High was.
For heaven's sakes.
So I got through my 3rd year at Aviation High and was going into my 4th year. And believe it or not, now I'm not going to brag that I've done excellent, but I've done so much better at Aviation High.
You found the proper niche, didn't you?
I found out, instead of learning how to spell and all that stuff and, you know, history and geography, I learned something I could do with my hands.
Wonderful.
So I didn't graduate, so I did a lot better at school. And now you want to know about, I was working at a drugstore in College Hill, Whaley's Drugstore. I was a soda jerk, and I delivered medicine. So this particular Sunday, I was delivering medicine, and I happened to be close to home. And I always would go home, and Mom would bake a pie or something, and I could sneak some pie. So this afternoon, I went in the kitchen door, and I do the same with my wife today. I hollered, "Mom?" But Mom didn't answer. I thought, oh my gosh, what's the matter with Mom? So I walked through the kitchen, through the dining room, and into the living room, and my mother and my dad was standing crouched over the radio. And my mother was crying. So I come up, put my arm around Mom. I said, "Mom, what's the matter?" My dad says, "Shut up." And when my dad said, "Shut up," you shut up.
Right.
Well, then I listened a little longer. I started crying. Well, y'all know what happened December the 7th, 1941. Well, my big brother, Sam Jr., was at Pearl Harbor. And this was the broadcast on Pearl Harbor Day.
And so, of course, nobody knew what had happened to him.
Absolutely. Wow. And you know, I almost want to cry right now.
I can imagine so. I understand. Well, now your brother served on a submarine?
The submarine, he was on the USS Blackfin.
Blackfin.
And my mother finally got a card from him about, I think it was the 12th.
Isn't that amazing?
That he was okay.
Wow.
And
hallelujah. Oh.
So I decided, I think I want to go in the Air Force, or the Army was what it was.
Army Air Corps.
So I asked my parents, and my dad said, "Absolutely not." He said, "We got one son in the service, we don't need another." So Monday morning, guess what I did? I skipped school. I went down to the recruiting office. Now I'll show you how smart you are when you're 17 years old. I walked in, the man said, "Can I help you?" I says, "Well, yes, sir." I said, "I want to enlist in the Army." He said, "How old are you?" And really, I was very young looking. I was small. And I said, 18. He said, "Okay." So we filled out the papers. Now, I'll show you how dumb you are when you're a 17-year-old kid. He said, "Do you have a telephone at home?" I said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Write the number down the corner." So he wrote the number down the corner. He walked away, he come back, and he says, "Bring this paper back with your parents' signature, or bring your birth certificate when you're 18 years old." And I looked at him and I thought, how did he figure that out? Well, he called my mom, if you want to know the truth. So when I turned 18, then they couldn't stop me.
Yeah.
Then I joined the Army.
Right, that's a wonderful story. Where did they first send you?
I went to Dayton.
Went to Dayton. Right.
And
Right field, huh?
well, it was Patterson Field.
Patterson Field.
Yeah, Patterson and Wright were together.
Yeah, but it wasn't called Wright Patterson at that time.
No, it was Patterson Field. Then I went through basic training at Patterson.
Yeah, close to home.
Yeah, well, I guess because I lived, when I enlisted, incidentally, my serial number is 1534-1200, which
That's
shows
pretty
that I enlisted.
Yeah.
Instead, and if you were drafted, you had a 3 in front of your serial
Right,
number.
right. Well, that's, how long were you there at Patterson, Jack?
Just through basic. They then loaded me in a train and sent me to Biloxi, Mississippi. And you know, the funny part of this all is I have never been more than 50 miles away from home in my whole life.
Here, all of a sudden, they're sending you.
Here I am on the road. And when I got to Biloxi, I do believe they had so many people that they didn't know what to do with us.
Mm-hmm.
So every day I was out marching. Marching and marching. I got sick and tired of marching. So one day, I'm in the day room. You know what a day room is. And I thought, man, I'm tired of marching. And I looked up on this wall, and there was like a circus poster. It said, "Be a sergeant, wear wings, flying pay, aerial gunner." I get goosebumps when I think about it.
Sure, because that was a...
So I walked up to the headquarters and I told them I'd like to find out about being an aerial gunner. So they write down an address. I said, "When do you want me to go?" They said, "Now."
Wow.
So I walked down and I walked in the room. It was a big barracks. And I'll never forget it because it had a big door with a little door in it. And I opened it up and I looked in and there was a soldier sitting in the corner. He says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yes, sir, I want to find out about aerial gunnery school." He says, "You're at the right place." So he pulled out his drawer, got the paper, put it down. They asked me a bunch of questions, and I've been through a bunch of physicals. And went through all kinds of sicknesses, and he said, "Sign it."
Yeah.
So I signed it, and he said, "Come with me." So we went down the hall, and he knocked on the door, and I heard the officers, or I didn't know they were officers, but I heard them say enter. So I walked in, and I looked up, there's 2 officers, and I saluted. Private Jack D. Keller, 1534-1200. Sit down. So the one officer was reading the paper. It was the fastest physical I had ever gone through in my lifetime, and I've been through a bunch of them in the service. I do believe, I might be exaggerating, I think he felt my forehead, And I believe he took his hand on one side and looked through my ear and didn't see it move. He said, "That'll be all." So I walked out and I walked over to this gentleman. I says, "I wanted to find out about gunnery school." "Oh," he says, "watch your bulletin board." So I go back to the base, or go back to my barracks. 3 days later, my name comes up on the bulletin board.
Oh, boy.
So I go up to the office and he says, "Pack your bags, you're leaving in the morning." And I moved so fast, it was unbelievable. They did need gunners.
Sure. And where did they send you?
They sent me to Las Vegas, Nevada.
Oh, boy. You really are getting around.
Yeah, well, you know, that's a long trip.
Oh,
And I'll tell you what, I realized and seen what a big, beautiful country we have. And I'll never forget when I got to Denver, we were in them old smoky trains.
Yep.
I was kind of crummy, and I remember I got to Denver and I washed a little bit, and changed trains, and I remember going through that Royal Gorge.
Wow.
And I looked up and I seen that high bridge.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Royal Gorge of Colorado. Yeah.
So we took off, and then it got hot, and then we opened the doors, the windows, and man, when I got to Las Vegas, I was really crummy.
Black.
Yeah, that's the way it was in
Oh,
the
sure.
So I'll never forget, there was an officer that met me there, and he looked at me, and he says, "Go inside. Get some cold water if you want." He says, "There'll be some more coming." So I think about 11 more showed up. But they all come from the West Coast.
Oh.
I was the only one to travel all the way across the country.
Mm-hmm.
So they lined us all up. And the first thing out of that officer's mouth, "So help me God, all you gentlemen are the cream of the crop." And yeah, I thought he looked at me and I thought, man, I'm so crummy. I thought, what a smart aleck this guy is, you know. But then the more he talked, the more I understood him.
Sure.
That they were glad to have us there. We were going to, and he said, this is class so-and-so. He said, "You'll go through 5 weeks of the toughest schooling you'll ever have in your lifetime."
Well, my goodness, well, that's obvious that they recognize you and your fellow mates as quality people who were meant for this job, and that is important. Now, after 5 weeks in Vegas, then what happened?
Well, before that, I could tear a 50 caliber machine gun down, blindfold it, and put it together.
Wow.
Really. We never flew in a B-17. We flew AT-6s and AT-11.
Yeah.
Well, the beauty part of it was when we graduated, we automatically became a buck sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
So they took us to the Hotel Last Frontier. They set us right below the announcer. They gave us $10. I'll never forget it. They gave us $10 and fed us. We could drink. Well, I didn't drink. We all lost our $10. You could bet on that. And then they had a rodeo. And none of us knew, so they announced, "This is class so-and-so, gunners."
Mm-hmm.
Then they announced the names as growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And they said sergeant in front of every one of us.
Wow.
And it was a shock.
Of course. Well, you had earned it because you were.
So anyway, then we went back. We sent this to Salt Lake City,
Okay.
formed a crew, went to Pio, Texas,
Hmm.
got introduced to the B-17,
Mm-hmm.
and the rest of my crew. And I'd like to tell you how Lieutenant Stevenson, who was our command pilot, he was 28 years old, the greatest man I ever met in my life.
He was an old man.
Absolutely.
That's
And we had a top turret gunner. He was an old man too. He was 28.
Wow.
I was the youngest, 19.
Gee whiz.
So when we got to Paiute, Lieutenant Stevenson introduced himself, and he says, "Gentlemen," he says, "I'm command pilot, Lieutenant Stevenson." He says, "Lieutenant Dahlgren here is co-pilot." Now this is the beauty part about this. And he says, "Lieutenant Todd is bombardier, Lieutenant Smith, navigator." He said, "Now, Sergeant Ramey is radio operator." He says, "Now, I have one man that's just a gunner." And that was Al Acuna, that little Mexican boy. He said, "You're a waist gunner." He said, "Now, I got two armors." And he looked at Bill Levitsky, real tall boy, and he says, "You're the other waist gunner, and you're an armor." And he looked at Hatchet, and said, "You're small, you're an armor, you're a ball turret." Now, to show you how smart Lieutenant Stevenson was, he said, "Now I have two aircraft engineers." See, because in the meantime, I'd gone to AM school also. I forgot to tell that. And he looked at me and he said, "Would you want the old man to go in the tail?" And well, Lieutenant Stevenson just challenged me. I said, "I'll be the best damn tail gunner you ever had." So that automatically put the right man in the top turret engineer.
Well, and you were starting to bond right away as a team, weren't you?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and it shows you how smart Lieutenant Stevenson was. He wanted the older man with this moxie, let's face it, up in the,
That's it.
as engineer,
Yeah.
to help them, and he wanted me in the tail.
How about that?
And I volunteered. You know, I was bad on volunteering.
You were always ready, weren't you?
Yeah. So then we trained as a crew, and it was wonderful to be assigned to the B-17 because that was the plane of the future.
Right.
Think about it.
Oh, yes.
Everybody wanted to be in the B-17.
Oh, yeah. Flying Fortress.
Yes.
You bet.
So I want to tell a story of my jacket here. I'd like to show it to you if I could, please. This was the name.
Yep. Old scrap iron.
And this is my original A2 jacket. Now the name is Old Scrap Iron. Now Lieutenant Stevenson and the officers went to town. And they were going to have a very good time, but a bunch of young rowdies come in, decided they were going to take over. So
This was in Salt Lake City?
no, this was in Paiute, Texas. Oh, didn't I mention?
Yeah, you did. I'm sorry. Yeah.
This was in Paiute, Texas, but I don't know where they were, whether they were in, I don't believe they were in Paiute, Texas itself. I believe they were somewhere else having a good time. So these rowdies come in and they pick on the biggest, Lieutenant Stevenson, the meanest looking, but absolutely the nicest, the finest man I ever met in my life. And he's easygoing, and they started pushing him around because they felt we control him, we control the situation. So he kept backing up, and finally he got fed up. Well, they finally backed him to the wall, and he cleaned house absolutely by himself. So when the officers come back, they told us the story. The Kinley, somebody gave him the nickname of Old Scrap.
How about that?
So then we left Paiute, Texas. We went to Grand Island, Nebraska. where we picked up a brand new B-17. We took off, we went to Goose Bay, Labrador, fueled up, then went to Reykjavik, Iceland. Then we refueled there, and we landed in, I believe, I can't swear about it, I think it was Belfast, Ireland.
Northern Ireland.
And I thought, man, we got a brand new B-17, you know, with the large tail. And well, we didn't get that B-17. We dropped it off right there.
Oh.
Then we were assigned to the 447th Bomb Group, 711th Bomb Squadron.
Mm-hmm. Where was that based?
That was at Rattleston, Suffolk, England. It was about 15 miles from Ipswich on the East Coast. It was the fourth bomb wing or third bomb wing. Anyway, they then were sending us to school in the officers club to give us some moxie or some smarts in combat.
How we get one?
Well, you can go to all the schools you want about combat. There's nothing like the real thing. Absolutely.
That's right.
So I'll never forget, we were in school and I heard the most terrific explosion that I ever heard in my lifetime. Bottles were coming down, pictures were coming off the wall and everything, and we all run outside, we looked down the line, and man, it was the biggest puff of smoke I ever seen in my life. So we all run down the line, and we got down there was 3 B-17s. Now there was something happened. 3 B-17s all destroyed, 1 gas truck, and 14 men lost their lives.
Oh my goodness.
And they were giving sacks out to people going around picking up pieces.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a sad awakening. I thought, what in the heck are we doing? Yeah. And I understand there was some problem that he had oxygen to do with this explosion.
So it was an explosion on the ground.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we went back to school, and here we go volunteering again. They says, we want volunteers for Toggleers. And I said, well, what's a Toggleer?
Yeah.
They said, drop the bombs. You will man the nose turret and toggle or salvo the bombs. Oh yeah. So I go to Toggleer school, which was nothing. All I had to do was arm the bombs, you know, man the nose turret, because they had the nose turret on the B-17 then. And then the only thing I had to be careful was if they toggled the bolts or the bombs, I had to toggle, or if they salvoed, because when you lose 5-6 ton of bombs, you jump.
Right.
Or if you toggle, you go. So there had been planes that actually were down because they
Hadn't been toggled right.
yeah, they hadn't been done right. So believe it or not, I get a call to go on my first mission, and I says, how about the rest of my crew? They said they're not flying. I thought, what the heck's going on here? So I want to explain something. I think it's very stupid to take a young man, fly him in a strange position with a strange crew as a Toggleer. And that's what they had done to me. So I go down, and you know when you're new, you don't want anybody to know you're a freshman. You know?
Oh, no.
Everybody's a sophomore or a junior, you know.
Absolutely.
You hate to be a freshman.
Sure.
So I never said a word, and I think Lieutenant Kennedy was my. So I flew as their Toggleer. Well, I only seen ME-109s on 4 of my 26 missions, but I was introduced to them on this mission.
Now, an ME was a Messerschmitt
109.
twin engine?
No, it was one.
Oh, this was a fighter plane?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
They made, I don't know how many passes, but all the passes were from the tail. But I'll never forget, because it's something that you cannot explain. They knew what they were hunting for, and then when our P-51s started showing up, they're gone.
Yeah.
See? Well, I fired, there was some 109 shot down. Now, the beauty part about AMI 109, what they used to do, they used to send up to check out the wings. You know, we flew as a wing.
Mm-hmm.
That's 3 groups.
How many in the group?
Well, that was be 20 to 21 in a group.
Okay.
So you had a lead group, a high group, and a low group. And when you dropped bombs, you dropped off to the lead bombardier.
Sure.
So these guys attacked our low group. And I don't know which group it was, and I was lucky, I was in the high group. But I seen what was happening in front of me, and that's terrible,
Yeah.
because you know that's where you're going.
Sure. All that fly.
And all of a sudden I look and I see all this black smoke, and as these wings would go through, I'll tell you what, they'd have 2 hours and we would have 60 aircraft, one wing right after another, go over to a target. We'd have 800 to 1,000 B-17s and 24s.
Really?
Now think about it.
No. The sky was
And
dark.
the later the group or the wing you're through, the blacker the sky is, the scarier it is, because that's all flak.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you know what flak is. It's where the shell is set for the altitude and explodes. And so I was introduced to the Luftwaffe and flak on the same first mission as a rookie.
That's a rookie. Well, Jack, that is such a unforgettable, as you say, experience. Was your plane hit? Was
We were, flak always hit our planes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But our planes were pretty strong, weren't they?
Well, I'll tell you what, the B-17 saved so many lives. That's the reason I'm here. We come back with 2 engines shot out.
Right.
Now think about what I'm telling you.
Amazing what they could do.
And I flew with 6 different crews and 12 different B-17s because Lieutenant Stevenson was killed on his first mission.
Oh my goodness.
Well, I guess I have to tell that story.
Okay.
Well, after I flew my first mission, and by the way, I flew in a plane called Gum Chum with Lieutenant Kennedy, and the last 3 numbers, I got the full number, but the last 3 was 501. Now, we were hit, but these guys on the ground were so terrific. They'd have these planes flying as fast as they could. So believe it or not, 2 days later, Lieutenant Stevenson, my command pilot, was flying as a co-pilot with Lieutenant Wilson, I think. I'm not sure. I got the name, but I'm not. So they were heading for Berlin. This was April the 29th of 1941, and I flew April the 27th in 42, or 44, I mean.
44, okay, right.
So our group lost 11 B-17s
Oh my goodness.
and 1 ditched into the channel for the greatest loss we ever had. And the sad part about all of it is there's mistakes.
Oh, sure.
Whenever this happened,
Yeah.
it's a mistake
Yeah.
because the Germans checked you out. An ME-109 could only fight for 20 minutes. And so they would send up to check out who they're going to pick on. And believe it or not, they had what they call Purple Heart Corner. I don't know if you ever heard what that was. That's low squadron, low group, and that's all the new crews. The Germans knew this also started at Purple Heart Corner.
Right. You're
So
this was the most vulnerable.
Right, and if there was any mistakes being made, guess
Yeah.
where it was made? Usually at Purple Heart Corner.
Wow.
And I thank the Lord that I didn't fly too many missions at Purple Heart Corner.
We certainly all are. You're talking about returning from a mission, and many of your planes were badly damaged.
Oh, yes.
Some of them, as you say, had to ditch in the channel. How about landing?
Oh, we had, believe it or not, I sweat out many a mission, you know, with different guys waiting for friends to come back. You know, and you'd see these red flares.
Sure.
Well, then everybody else would fly all around, and then if you was firing red flares, you had wounded and you had to get on the ground.
Right now.
So then they would keep the guys that were shot up so bad, they had to crash land, and they would try to keep them off the runways.
Right.
And we always, I don't care what mission it was, you always had battle damage, whether it would be flak. We did not hit fighters that often, which I thank the Lord. Earlier it was worse.
Yes.
But one thing, the only bad part about being in the tail is most of your attacks were from the tail, and like I say, from Purple Heart Corner.
Yeah.
So
You were out there. You were exposed
well,
as a tail gunner.
yeah, it was 60 degrees below zero,
Oh my goodness.
and it was quite cold because both waist windows were wide open, and if you were cruising at 170 mile an hour, we'll say, the wind's coming through and it hits you right in the glass. You're kneeling, which is the beauty part about being a tail gunner, because you're always on your knees. And you're up there praying to the good Lord.
You bet. I should say.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's
Good.
a wonderful part about it.
Well, and one of the beauties of this is, in your story, that you were young and you were strong and you were healthy and you'd been well trained. And did you said on different planes that you flew in different
Yes.
planes, and that was because your former plane had been shot down, or
Well,
ruled
the
out?
main reason I was transferred so many crews because my pilot was killed on his first mission.
Oh, I
You
see.
can't you can't fly without a pilot.
That's right. That's right. So you had.
Well, now I'll tell you a story about my second crew.
Okay.
I was then assigned to Lieutenant Pettis. I'm just getting to know the people, being friends. Well, I wanted to tell you a little story before I get to there. I'll never forget when I got into my barracks, or Neeson Hut. There's 6 men here and 6 men here. That's 2 crews. I walked in, and I'm all bubbly and friendly and everything, you know. And these 6 guys are all there, and I said, hi, you know, and I'm talking to you. And I thought, this is the most unfriendly bunch of guys I've ever met in my entire life.
Wow.
Nobody wanted to even say hi, see. So
That's something.
I got to thinking, I'll just keep my mouth shut. Well, you know what? About 5 missions later, guess what? They were gone. So
All of them?
the whole crew, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So we hauled their bags out, which they done with the crew before when I got into bed, see. We hauled their bags out, and I got to thinking, you know, this is pretty gruesome, you know.
Yeah.
You know a guy and then he's gone.
Yeah.
So in my hut that I was in, we lost 5 different crews.
Oh my goodness.
So I can understand why nobody would want to even be friends.
You just didn't want to get connected.
That's right.
Because it was too...
Because he got hurt so...
Sure.
I'll tell you the truth, I could cry right now.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Thinking about Lieutenant Stevenson going down.
Yeah.
And you know, how many years later was it, Ann, that we went up to Washington D.C. and got...
About 55 years later.
Many years later, I went up to Washington D.C. and got the missing aircrew report for Lieutenant Stevenson's
Oh,
crew
yes.
when he got killed. And only 1 man got out.
1 out of 6.
And do you know how Lieutenant Stevenson died? They asked this, I got the missing aircrew report, and that
Right.
their parachutes in the cockpit were burned beyond use.
Oh my
Now
goodness.
think about what I just
Oh,
said.
how ironic.
So, and I'll tell you what, when I read that, I started crying.
Yeah, yeah.
And this big black guy was head of he come up to me and he put his,
Yeah.
and I'll never forget. I'll tell you, it was pretty gruesome
Yeah, I should say.
for a young kid. And
By this time, you're only 20, aren't you?
yeah, June the 1st was my birthday.
Good heavens.
So I turned 20 years old.
Just imagine.
Yep.
Oh, gosh. Well, we just, yesterday, the 2nd of May, is what we call VE Day, Victory in Europe.
Yeah, that's right.
1944. I'm sorry, 1945.
1945, yeah.
1945. Now, were you flying clear up into
No.
45?
No, I left in 44. I come back,
How many missions did you
I
have?
flew 26.
26 missions.
See, and I was supposed to fly 30.
Uh-huh.
But on the 25th mission, we were over Hanover, we were after oil,
Uh-huh.
and the tail got shot all to heck. And my plexiglass window exploded. I had my oxygen mask on, I had my helmet, I had my flak suit,
Sure.
And my oxygen mask was just full of plexiglass and my forehead.
Mm-hmm.
And I pulled my glove off, and you could only take it off for 15, 20 seconds. You know, that cold, I picked up there and there's blood. I thought, oh, hell.
Oh my gosh.
So I put it back on again, and I wiped again, and so we got back, even with the tail shot up as bad as it was. I went to the doctor after debriefing, and he cleaned it up, and he looked at it, he pulled out a couple of pieces of plexiglass and says, "You're a good kid, you're fine."
Here's your Purple Heart.
No, I didn't get a Purple Heart, it wasn't bad enough.
Oh, for heavens.
Well, now, let me finish this story. So, I go back and I fly one more mission, and I'd been in there to see Captain Weber so many times, and my chest was clogged up. They finally sent me back to the States. But anyway, what was I, 70 years old?
72.
72 years old, we were going to an air show.
Mm-hmm.
And we went around Indianapolis and going out 74. And my wife says, "Jack, I want a cup of coffee." You know where Brownsburg is?
Yep.
Well, there's a Hardee's there.
Okay.
So we stopped in that Hardee's. I'm there getting a cup of coffee, and I end up in Methodist Hospital. And I thought, what in the heck's the matter with me? I want to show you how the good Lord is so good to me. I had a seizure. I hit my head on the table, and the life squad come, and then they sent me to the Methodist Hospital. So Dr. Cooper, was it? he checks me out and he said, we're gonna put a pacemaker in you. I said, now wait a minute. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. You need a pacemaker. I said, now wait a minute. So they put me and my wife in a room. They're getting our operating room ready to put a pacemaker in me. And guess what happened? I had a grandma Caesar. And well, you can ask her, I must have just about tore the place up. So they come in and they finally controlled me. So they said, well, no, we don't think you need a pacemaker.
Oh,
So the good Lord took care of me.
sure.
Now, the man asked me, he says, do you have any metal in your body? I says, absolutely not that I know of. So they're going to give me an MRI. Now guess what happened?
They found some.
After the MRI, they were checking my brain for a tumor. So Dr. Cooper comes up and puts his hand on my head, and he says, don't ever get an MRI again. I said, why? He says, you got metal. So I had metal in my forehead from World War II that nobody knew anything about, and it's still there.
All those years, and it's still there.
And I went on Delanton, 24 Delanton a week for 10 years with him. Until I finally had a heart attack. And then they checked my brain again, and they decided to take me off of Delanton. Now I'm on other medicine.
No,
But think about that. I'd have a pacemaker in me, and I have metal up there. Now, the reason I cannot get another MRI, you know why? They're afraid to pull the metal out my eye.
oh, for goodness sakes. Well, that's just an amazing story. And to think that they, at the time it happened, that they couldn't detect that.
Well, they didn't have nothing. What did they have in that Anissa nut where that doctor was? They didn't have nothing to check it out.
Sure, and that was in England.
Yeah, that was in England.
That was in
That
England.
was on our base.
Well, then, after your 26th mission and you're back, how did you get back to the States? Did you fly
They
back?
flew me back.
They flew you back?
They flew me back in a C-54.
Oh, be darned. Big
I
transfer.
flew to LaGuardia Field.
Yeah.
Then they sent me to Santa Ana, California, to the hospital for a month.
Clear across the country.
And then here's a good story.
Good.
They asked me, they said, where would you like to go? When I was out of Santa Ana. And I know how the Army operated. I had been to Amarillo, Texas. They said, where do you want to go? I said, Amarillo, Texas. You know where they sent me? To Chanutfield, Illinois.
Oh.
I knew just exactly that it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So I spent the rest of my Army at Chanutfield, Illinois, working on AT-6s.
And you were closer to home.
Oh yeah, I got home pretty often.
Why, sure.
Yeah.
If you'd said Chanute Field, they would have sent you to
Probably said the
Amarillo.
Amarillo. See, that's where I was getting a little bit smarter.
Well, listen, you were an experienced guy.
And then I was going to tell you about the story about my second crew, but I think I
Oh, yeah.
passed that up.
All right.
I flew my second, third, fourth, and fifth mission with Lieutenant Pettis.
Pettis?
So on my sixth mission, I went to briefing, and my chest was all clogged up. And Lieutenant Pettis come up to me and he says, Sergeant Keller, what's the matter with you? And I couldn't hardly talk. And I says, my chest is clogged. I said, but I'll be all right. All I have to do is breathe on a little oxygen. No, he says, you're grounded. So of all the people to pick to replace me on that crew, he had a twin brother who was a ball turret gunner, and they were on the same crew.
What was their name?
Joe Clappett was the gunner that took my place. And George Clappett was his brother, but I had no idea what their name was.
Right.
Well, I'm sweating them out. And they come up to me and I says, what the heck happened to my second crew? They said they got shot down, that the plane blew up.
Oh, goodness.
And I immediately went down on my knees and was thanking the Lord for saving my life.
Sure, of course.
I should have been praying for the other tail gunners, what I should have been doing. But anyway,
It's understanding.
it wasn't they grabbed me and they said, come on with me. And I said, what's the matter? So they hid me. His twin brother come after me, was going to kill me with his 45.
Mm-hmm.
And incidentally, they took all 45s away from everybody from then on in.
Oh,
too.
really?
Yeah. Which was, well, a good thing, really. Well, we were in France, 1999, at a reunion.
Right.
And the last tail gunner of Old Scrap Iron was president of our club. We were good friends. We went all over the country telling the story. Anyway, he had a roster, and I looked at it, and I seen this, I'm hunting for Keller,
Mm-hmm.
and I seen this name Clappett. I thought, that name looked that big, looked like a neon sign. I wrote a story about it. And I thought, what's that name Clappett got to do with me? So I've been to a bunch of reunions. Now, Ann was on my left, Byron, my friend was opposite me at the table. Now there's 32 of us with her. And a total stranger, never been to a reunion before. And I mentioned to Byron the name Clappett. And he said, what? What about Clappett? I said, the name. And this stranger sitting next to me, he says, they were twins. Do you know I've been trying to find out about this ever since I've been out of the service? Because they weren't supposed to be flying on the same cruise, see?
No.
So this guy and Colonel Warfel were writing the story, which is, the story is in One Lucky Bastard. That's the name of the book.
Right.
I'll bring that tomorrow.
Okay, good.
And so he says, we're investigating these twins now. And I says, well, Joe's dead. He said, no.
My
He said he was a POW.
Oh.
So I got their address, I got home, I wrote him a letter, and I got a letter there from Joe. You know, and I kept watching the mail every day. I thought, you know, he's not going to write me, which I don't blame him, you know.
Sure.
Finally, I got the letter. It's the most wonderful letter
Yeah.
I ever received in my life.
Yeah. Well, now what about George?
Well, and you know what Joe signed on the letter? Love.
Oh, boy.
Now think about that.
Yeah.
I got the letter, I'll even show it to you if you'd
Yeah.
like to see it.
Yeah.
So then I called up Joe that night, and I asked him, I said, you think George would see me? So he says, well, let me call him, let me talk to him first.
Okay.
So about 3 weeks later, we went to,
Ann Arbor.
no, not Ann Arbor,
No. Anyhow, get there right now.
right outside of Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And I had lunch with Joe and his wife, or George.
Uh-huh.
And now George, his wife didn't even know he was in the service. Now think about this.
Really?
And she had no idea what went on.
No.
And I talked to, now what they had done, they told George, he sent me home to the States. They told me, they sent George home.
Mm-hmm.
Because he threatened to kill me, see.
Right.
So we found out we were only 3 decent huts apart.
Is that so?
And he thinks that we flew on some of the same missions.
Uh-huh.
Not in the same crew, but the same missions.
I understand.
And I had to ask him the question, would you have pulled the trigger if you'd have found me? And his answer was, in a heartbeat.
Isn't that something?
And we have become absolute best friends in the world today. I got letters from him this morning on the email.
Just imagine.
I wrote Joseph and told him about my brother dying several years ago, and them two adopted me as their little brother.
Isn't that? What a wonderful story. Well, Jack, that was so typical of the times. Emotions ran so high, and personalities. You were so close with the people that you flew with, you know. I mean, you guys were a team. You depended upon each other.
Yeah, it's tough when you lose.
Oh.
You know, like I said, they had 12 men, enlisted men. That's one crew, two crews in one hut.
Right.
And you got to the place where that's all you even wanted to talk to. You didn't want to, you know, and I'm going to be truthful with you. I normally am a real friendly person. I tell everybody I love them. You know, a lot of people look at me strange and say, what's, just like at the meeting yesterday, I had the meeting of the IBEW, and I tell everyone, there's only one woman, but I tell everyone when I sign off the meeting, I love every one of them.
Sure.
And I do.
Well, sure.
See?
Well, you're a compassionate man, and you were raised properly in a wonderful family, and you had an older brother who served, and that is just a terrific thing. How about your last mission?
My last mission, I don't even remember where my last mission was. Can I go look?
Well, no, you stay there. We'll.
My last mission, all I know is we didn't hit any enemy. We always hit flak.
How far into Germany did you get? How was the farthest mission?
Well, now you know, Berlin.
Okay.
I went to Berlin 2 days in a row.
Okay.
You know, the strange part about it all is, it didn't matter how far you went. Just like Berlin was, I had 2 missions to Berlin. One was 8 hours, and one was 8 hours, I think, and 20 minutes.
Wow. That's a long
Now, we bombed Caen D-Day, the first mission.
France. Caen, France.
Do you know how much time we were over enemy territory? 6 hours.
Oh my
Now think about what I'm telling you. There's so many planes
Yes.
that we had to go all the way down into southern France, all the way through France and come back up. Then I skipped the next mission, then I went on the 3rd mission. And that was 6 hours and 20 minutes.
Good heavens.
To hit Lesseps, France, and that's even closer to the coast.
Yeah, right.
So the distance didn't mean anything, actually, in a case like that, because there's so many planes that you had to fly through.
Sure.
Now, I think my furthest mission, I could tell you, because I got my actually time,
Right.
but I got 178 hours and some minutes in enemy territory time.
Over enemy territory. Well, that is truly a remarkable story, and your memory is so good. Of course, you've got this great book that you put together of your memoirs and everything, which keeps things alive, and that is a wonderful piece for the archives eventually. You know.
Well, see, the beauty about this is I go, well, up until last year, or 2 years ago when I had the heart attack, I went to 12, 15 air shows a year.
Really?
Oh yeah, I went with Colonel Morgan, pilot of the Memphis Belle,
Goodness
and Byron Schlag. We went all over the country to these different air shows.
Yeah.
And I always talked about it.
Right. Now, you're working on this B-17 that's up at the Blue Ash Airport?
My gal Sal, I've been working on, I worked on it for over 5 years.
Is that
volunteer.
so? What's the future for that thing?
Well, they passed a tax levy And they said they were going to build a building for us to assemble it. We have it in 2 hangars right
I
now,
know, I've
in
seen it.
sections.
I've been up there to see it.
And it's a beautiful,
Oh.
oh, it's the most beautiful B-17 I've ever seen in my life.
Gorgeous. crap.
General Electric sent 10 men out. They went over all 4 engines. Them engines look like they come out of the factory.
Wow.
And my wings, my original wings that I wore with the blue background, my Bible that my mom gave me, and one of my dog tags are in my gal Sal, framed, and will be there from here on in.
Right. Well, I know that there's some question about the future of the plane location with the business about who's going to take over the airport from U.S.
Well, Cincinnati now, Blue Ash was it 37 million in? Offered 37 million for I think 137 acres of the ground.
Right.
The runway and the hangars will still be Cincinnati.
Still be Cincinnati.
Now, they say they're going to build a building for my gal Sal.
Yeah.
I hate to say this, we haven't been there for a couple of years. I don't think I'll see him, which kind of makes me feel bad.
Well, that's another story, and I mentioned our Tri-State Warbird Museum out at the Claremont County Airport, and we're going to get you out there to see that because that is really.
You know, I have I can't think of his name. He's from the 100 Bomb Group. I think he's got a display out there.
Could be. Yeah.
I was invited to come out there, but see, I was working on my gal Sal. That's all I cared about.
I understand.
My gal Sal at the time.
Sure.
I look forward to going to Blue Ash to work on that B-17
Oh, yes.
with my good friend Bob Erb. He was in the 8th Air Force also. And we went to school together when we were kids.
Isn't that amazing?
And we worked together on the
Isn't that amazing?
B-17.
You're still lifelong friends, of course, and everything.
And, you know, I like to tell this story if you wouldn't mind.
We love it.
My wife says no. I knew my wife when we were youngsters. But see, we were complete. Did you ever hear the Pillar Fire Church
I've heard of it, yeah.
in College Hill?
Okay,
Well, they're as far from Catholic as you can get.
right.
Well, my wife here, Ann, is Roman Catholic.
Okay.
We went to different schools. We knew each other. I was allowed to play ball with her, stuff like that, but I wasn't allowed to go talk to her. So I come out of the service in World War II, and at the corner of Hamilton and Galbraith was a place called Butch's Place. I don't know if you ever thought. It was a hangout for the youngsters.
Okay.
And I met my buddy in there. He got out of service. And we were sitting up at the bar and we drank a beer. And I seen 2 real pretty girls there, you know. And all these guys surrounding them. I thought, did I know they were redhead, or I'd seen her somewhere before? So after the guys peeled out, I walked up and I said, "Are you Ann Sand?" She said, "Yeah, are you Jack Keller?" I said, "Yeah." Here we are.
Isn't that something?
61, will be 62 years.
Oh, my goodness.
And I turned all that beautiful red hair gray. And we've had a wonderful life. And the beauty part about it is, no matter what the religion is, I've got the finest lady in the world.
Oh, absolutely.
My mother, best friend in the world, become my wife. Now I have to kind of say this. My mother-in-law never ever forgive me for not changing to be a Catholic. Now we do not go to church regular. We believe.
Mhm.
All our kids go where they want to go, our
Yes.
4 children.
4 children.
And we have a wonderful family. And the good Lord has truly blessed me.
Well, you are really, you've expressed yourself so well, not only about what you did during the war, Jack, but the way you are, the way you were raised, and then meeting this wonderful woman and having all this great life together and 4 children. What,
Well,
2 sons and 2 daughters?
2 sons and 2 daughters. Our oldest son, he is retired out of the nuclear submarines
Oh,
of the
really?
Navy.
Uh-huh.
And he lives in South Carolina. He's building race cars and engines down in Somerville, South
For
Carolina.
heaven's sake.
And got 3 grandsons all driving race cars.
Is that so?
And,
You go and see them race and everything?
Well, I used to go down there
Yeah.
quite often, but since I had the heart attack, I don't get around to
Yeah, I
it.
understand.
And then
You have anybody here in town?
oh yeah, we have 2. And our oldest daughter is in Pittsburgh. She's a medical editor for the Pittsburgh University.
University of Pittsburgh.
And,
Okay, yeah.
her husband is head of the
Professor Carnegie Mellon.
at Carnegie Mellon.
Really? Wow.
And our youngest daughter, she works for Dr. So at the University of Cincinnati. She does a lot of work for him.
Isn't that's a...
And our youngest son, he come to work for me I'm a union electrician out of IBEW Local 212. And he come to work for me for Fogarty Electric and at Procter & Gamble's.
Fogarty Electric, I remember that.
And I spent 13 years with Fogarty Electric
How about
at Procter & Gamble's. And now my son, guess what? He's running work for, not Fogarty, it's a different company now.
Right, I understand. Well, it's a remarkable story, and you have just, you've expressed it so well, and you've expressed the spirit of the age, of the era. You know, they like to say, well, the greatest generation. Well, you know, you and I are of that generation, but I kind